As geeky as this probably sounds, Mary Ann and I are thrilled to have this opportunity to talk about one of our favorite topics, governance. And what's nice is that this information that we're going to cover in this governance series can be applied to service on any nonprofit board.
So what is this board service all about anyway? What's so difficult about it? You might be thinking, I've been a member of this organization for a while. I know what I know about it. I know the history, and I'm sure I can figure out the rest. While what you know and the experiences you've had are clearly valuable, when you start adding in your own interpretation of board service to the interpretation of 6, 10, or 20, or even more other board members, depending on the size of your board, without some true common ground, dysfunction is inevitable.
So here you are, you're on the board, or you're about to be on a board. What really does that mean? We probably all have our own preconceived notions. Yes, being on a board makes you a leader by title, but title does not make you an effective leader. That's a learned skill. Since we all have our own historical influences on our respective leadership styles, providing orientation and development training like this particular presentation helps to ensure we're all on the same page. So think about those presumptions you may have coming onto the board. Do you know the expectations of you as a board member, or do you assume you know what your role is based on either past experience or personal observation of those who've served before you? What are your assumptions based on? How do you know your past experience or observations are necessarily good, healthy, or effective?
So let's start at the beginning to make sure that we have our basics covered. What do we mean by governance? Governance is simply what every board does. It is simply the act of governing. However, as a term in and of itself, it doesn't say anything about how you govern. Contrary to popular interpretation, governance is not a style of board work. It's simply the work of the board. So yes, there are different styles of governance, but it is all still governance.
So how a board governs is largely determined by the kind of board that you are. And there are different types which tend to be influenced by where your organization is in its evolution and where it wants to go. So there's a founding board. And during an organization's infancy, you can start with this founding board. And here the board is the organization. The board has a strong sense of ownership because they essentially started with the whole thing. And this was their organization to begin with. So decision making is less about formality and more about just getting things done. There is little distinction between policies and simply administration. And the board is typically a small, intimate group with a few committees, but more of a divide and conquer mentality. Now, as the organization begins to grow, there are typically some growing pains that lead to a shift in governance style to more of a managing board. Now here, the board brings in more help, but retains responsibility. Staff is hired to take on administrative functions. There's a need for more formal decision-making processes. So the board focuses on making and enforcing policies and oversight of the administration. And unfortunately, that can lead to some weedy micromanagement if it's not checked. Committees become increasingly more important to carry out the groundwork of the organization. And the board recruits board members who are specialists in management, social media, finance, IT, etc. Then, as the organization continues to grow, the staff structure matures and long-term planning is recognized as a beneficial priority. The governance style matures as well.
So that brings us to the strategic board. This is the long-term sustainable model where governance is focused on the 10,000-foot high-level bigger picture. Responsibility and accountability are effectively shared between the board volunteers and the professional staff, led by a CEO or executive director. So while the board is ultimately accountable, decision-making authority is appropriately delegated. The board spends its time focused on the strategic vision of the organization and evaluates progress on that vision, whereas the CEO and a well-defined committee or task force structure is focused on the execution of that plan or vision. The organization seeks well-rounded and strategically minded volunteers to serve at the board level. So it's important to realize that no single board fits neatly and absolutely in any of these defined roles. Rather, any board is actually a hybrid of board types. However, mature organizations with professional staff generally strive to be strategic.
So I know you get all this. So what's the big deal? Even if you are pretty confident in your own experience and knowledge, it's not the same knowledge and experience as everyone else around the board table with you. So how do you know that your experience has been the appropriate experience for this board at this time? And even if it is, you still need to know that others around the table are hearing the same message. Now, a quick side comment, speaking of past experience, note that serving on a chapter or a more representational type of board is different than serving on a national board. In the national board, the board represents the best interests of the membership and professional across the country rather than any specific constituency. That said, if everyone around the table is not on the same page, a broken and dysfunctional board is all too often the result, which is not a healthy experience for you. It's not a healthy experience for others around the board. It's not a healthy experience for professional staff. And then by extension, it's certainly not a healthy experience for the entire organization.
So investing the relatively small amount of time upfront to ensure that everyone is hearing the same message will make serving together a distinctly better and more effective experience for all board members, which overall ultimately benefits the organization, and that's a big deal. So take a moment to reflect for yourself. What's influenced you that may in turn influence your approach to board service? Think about your real or observed experience with board service, not just this board specifically, but any board of which you have been a part or which you've actually observed. What do you hope to get out of your time serving on the board? For some organizations, board service is prestigious. It looks really good on your resume. That can be okay and is perfectly acceptable as long as the organization recognizes that that may be the case for some board members and adjusts its expectations accordingly for board service. Ideally, it's the best of both worlds. Directors are willing to do the appropriate work of governing while still gaining important experience and prestige that helps them professionally. So what's important to remember is, regardless of your reason for serving, that does not negate the basic responsibilities and accountability of any board or its directors, which is why it's important for every director to understand these and know what they're getting into.
All of this said, nothing about board service should cause you stress or anxiety. Contributing your time and talent to the success of a nonprofit organization, while sometimes unpredictable, should be a fun and rewarding experience. So enjoy the ride.
That wraps up our brief introduction to board service. Please remember, board development is a journey, not a destination. Check out our free ebook, Board Training Checklist, Going Beyond the Orientation. And don't forget to take a look at the other short videos in our governance video series.
Thank you for checking out this webinar. Informed volunteers like you are integral to the success of any nonprofit. For more information about the services RGI can provide nonprofits just like yours, check us out at Raybourn.com. So until next time, thank you for serving.